The email arrived at 20:14 in the morning. Subject line: "If you're reading this, I'm already dead." No sender name, no return address, just a file attachment 47 pages long, and a single sentence at the top of the document that made my stomach drop. "What we found beneath that desert cannot be contained. Not by them, not by anyone." The man who sent it identified himself as Yoav Kellner, 34 years old, 14 years as a Mossad field operative, assigned to Unit 8200's most classified Black Operations Division. He said he had 72 hours, maybe less. He said Iranian-linked assets had already tracked him to Prague. He said he wasn't writing to survive. He was writing because someone had to know the truth. 2 days after that email landed in my inbox, an Israeli national was found dead in a hotel room in the Wieghkov district of Prague. No signs of forced entry. No defensive wounds. Czech police listed the cause of death as cardiac arrest. The man was 34 years old and in peak physical condition. I've spent 3 weeks verifying every detail of what Yoav sent me. Unit designations, operation timelines, classified facility coordinates, everything that can be confirmed checks out against Israeli military records and independent satellite data. The seismic anomalies he described, still happening. The geological changes in that region of the Iranian desert, still visible on open source imaging. This is his account, exactly as he wrote it, every word. And once you hear what his team found buried 400 kilometers beneath the Iranian desert, you're going to have to decide whether the world you think you live in is the one you actually inhabit. His name was Yoav Kellner, 34 years old, 14 years in Israeli special operations, a man who had jumped from aircraft at 30,000 feet over Syrian airspace, breached fortified compounds in Beirut, and extracted assets from cities where his country officially had no presence. He had been trained to trust data, trust equipment, trust the team standing next to him in the dark. He had never been trained for what he found beneath the Iranian desert on the night of May 3rd. But before we get to that night, before we get to what happened inside those tunnels, you need to understand what brought his team there. Because the story of Operation Rising Lion doesn't begin with a mission briefing or a satellite photograph. It begins with a signal. 6 months before the operation, Israeli signals intelligence began picking up something strange from a region 400 kilometers southeast of Tehran. The coordinates sat in a stretch of desert that, according to every official map on the planet, contained nothing. No roads, no infrastructure, no population, just flat, dead earth under a merciless sun. But something was transmitting from that empty ground. The electromagnetic readings were unlike anything the analysts at Unit 8200 had processed before. Not the steady hum of industrial machinery, not the predictable frequency signature of military radar or communications equipment. These were low-frequency pulses, rhythmic, almost cyclical, rising and falling at intervals that felt less like mechanical output and more like a heartbeat. The satellite imagery that followed made it more confusing, not less. The photographs showed construction activity, underground bunkers, reinforced blast doors, heavy vehicle traffic, and what appeared to be the kind of layered security grid that Israel had spent decades learning to recognize the unmistakable infrastructure profile of an Iranian nuclear enrichment facility. The working assumption at Mossad became the obvious one. Iran had built another covert nuclear site. The electromagnetic anomalies were a byproduct of advanced centrifuge operations, or perhaps some new form of reactor shielding technology. The mission was simple: send a team in, confirm uranium enrichment, plant tracking devices for future airstrike targeting, and extract clean. That assumption would nearly get all 5 of them killed. The briefing for Operation Rising Lion took place at Glilit Junction on the morning of May 2nd. Yoav had sat in that same sterile room for 100 mission briefs over 14 years. White walls, metal table, fluorescent lighting that made everyone look slightly ill. The kind of room designed to feel temporary, because the work that was planned inside it was never supposed to be remembered. But that morning felt different. He noticed it before he could name it. Maybe it was the way Colonel Amir kept glancing at his watch, with the focused anxiety of a man expecting bad news. Maybe it was the intelligence package itself. The photographs were sharp but somehow revealed too little, as though someone had already decided how much the team needed to know. The electromagnetic data was included, but the accompanying analysis was thin. Gal Verde, their communications specialist, flagged it immediately. The frequency patterns don't match nuclear facilities. She was 32 years old, former computer science professor, fluent in 4 programming languages, and she had joined Mossad after her brother was killed in a Hezbollah rocket attack on Haifa. When she spoke about signals, people listened. Standard reactor output produces a steady field. These readings show periodic spikes, something cycling on and off. I've never seen this pattern from a centrifuge array. Colonel Amir told her the readings were consistent with a new generation of Iranian enrichment technology. The intelligence community's working hypothesis was that Tehran had developed variable speed centrifuge cascades to defeat detection profiling. Gal wrote something in the margin of her briefing packet. Yov never found out what it said, but he saw her face when she wrote it. Their team leader, Dov Margalit, was 40, 7 years old, 20 years in the field, and possessed the kind of quiet authority that doesn't need to announce itself. His gray beard was always precisely trimmed. His uniform was always regulation perfect. He had survived Gaza tunnel operations, mountain crossings in Syria, and 2 separate extractions from hostile territory on foot. When Dov set the aerial photographs on the metal table and spread them flat with both hands, the room went still without him asking. Target designation Lima 7. Grid reference 34, 25A1 North 58, 4637 Reach East. Mission objective: confirm weaponized enrichment activity, plant tracking transponders at 3 internal waypoints, and extract before the Euro 400 window. Ronnie Shashar studied the images the way a demolitions engineer always does, looking for structural vulnerabilities, blast propagation angles, load-bearing walls that could be exploited or avoided. He was 28, the youngest member of the unit, and his expertise with explosives had a reputation that preceded him through every division of Israeli special operations. He could neutralize a car bomb in under 4 minutes or collapse a 4-story building with charges smaller than a paperback novel. Construction is heavy, he said quietly. Soviet-era engineering. These walls are built to eat direct missile strikes. Omar Sabar, their medic, had spent 7 years at Hadassah Hospital before joining the military after treating too many casualties of terrorist attacks on civilians. He was 35, methodical and constitutionally calm in situations that dissolved other people. His kit carried morphine, radiation detectors, chemical analysis strips, and emergency antidotes for 3 categories of nerve agents. Biological hazard assessment, he asked. Negative, Dov replied. Standard contamination protocols apply. Omar nodded slowly, but Yov caught the fractional pause before he did, the half-second where a careful man absorbed information he wasn't sure he believed. The C-130 Hercules that carried them toward Iranian airspace 4 hours later flew at terrain, hugging altitude through a rocky desert. Radar signature suppressed. Interior stripped to bare metal and essential equipment. Yov had made insertions like this dozens of times. The pre-mission adrenaline was familiar, a tightening across the chest, a sharpening of perception. The body's ancient machinery preparing itself for danger. But somewhere over the border, somewhere in the dark between the aircraft's vibration and the silence of the team around him, he felt something else, something that didn't have a name in any operator's vocabulary. A weight, sourceless and heavy, pressing against the inside of his ribs like a warning his body understood before his mind did. He put it aside. He always put it aside. That was the last mistake he made before the real one started. What did they find when they finally breached the facility? And why did the first thing they encountered make Dov Margalit, a man who had survived 20 years of combat, stop moving and refuse to take another step forward? The jump window opened at 01:30. 5 operatives exited the aircraft at 1,000 feet over empty Iranian desert, falling in tight formation through air so cold it felt like breathing glass. No lights below them. No roads. No grid lines of civilization cutting the darkness into manageable squares. Just an enormous, breathing blackness stretching in every direction, and somewhere beneath it, a facility that didn't officially exist. They touched down clean. No contact. No patrols sweep within detection range. The desert floor was harder than the satellite terrain data had suggested, compacted, almost ceramic beneath their boots, as though the earth itself had been subjected to some long, slow compression. Yov filed the observation and moved on. The 4-kilometer approach to the facility perimeter took 40 minutes. Gal monitored Iranian communications traffic on encrypted frequencies throughout, feeding patrol rotation data to Dov through a bone conduction earpiece. The security grid had gaps, just as her weeks of signals analysis had predicted. They moved through those gaps the way water finds channels through rock, patient, methodical, invisible. The outer perimeter was exactly what the satellite imagery had shown. Reinforced concrete barriers, motion sensor arrays, vehicle access roads that led to blast doors set flush against a natural hillside. Standard construction. Standard security doctrine. Everything Yov had seen before in a dozen different countries. Ronnie got them through the blast doors in 11 minutes. A shaped charge on the locking mechanism. A controlled breach that left the structural integrity intact, and the alarm systems offline. Gal had already pushed a ghost signal into the facility's external sensor network, giving the Iranian security monitoring system a loop of clean data while the team moved inside. The first corridor was concrete and fluorescent, lit, exactly what they expected. The second was something else entirely. It began approximately 60 meters inside the perimeter, at a point where the manufactured tunnel transitioned into something older. The concrete ended abruptly, like a construction crew had suddenly stopped mid-pour and walked away. What lay beyond it was raw stone, walls carved with hand tools, the ceiling low and irregular, the floor worn smooth by what must have been thousands of years of foot traffic. No one spoke for a moment. Iranian intelligence is using a historical site, Dov said quietly, pre-Islamic, probably a Caymanid era. They built the outer facility around an existing structure to use the natural geology as radiation shielding. It was a reasonable explanation. It was also, Yov would later understand, completely wrong, but they moved deeper. The carved stone walls were not bare. In the beam of their tactical lights, markings became visible, geometric patterns, repeated sequences, symbols that Yov didn't recognize from any briefing on Iranian cultural heritage. Not Farsi, not Aramaic, something older. The kind of script that existed before the concept of a written language had fully organized itself into consistent form. Gal photographed everything. Her camera's flash produced a sound in that enclosed space that felt somehow inappropriate, like snapping photographs in a church during a funeral. Omar ran his radiation detector along the wall panels. Nothing. Zero emission. In a facility allegedly running uranium enrichment operations, that reading was, as Gal quietly noted, physically impossible. They pushed forward. 200 meters below the surface, the tunnel opened into a chamber. It was roughly circular, perhaps 40 meters in diameter, ceiling lost in darkness above them. The floor was flat and artificially leveled, but the walls curved naturally, suggesting the chamber itself had been enlarged rather than constructed from scratch. 4 Iranian technicians in civilian clothes sat at workstations arranged in a ring around the chamber's center, monitoring equipment whose function Yov couldn't immediately identify. Banks of servers, oscilloscope arrays, what looked like a modified particle detector normally used in physics research. None of the technicians looked up when the team entered. That was the first signal that something was fundamentally wrong. Dov moved to the nearest technician, placed a hand on the man's shoulder, and the man turned with the slow, liquid movement of someone operating underwater. His eyes were open and unfocused, tracking no particular point in the room, responding to no particular stimulus. He was breathing. His vital signs, when Omar quickly assessed them, were normal. He simply wasn't present. Cognitive dissociation, Omar said, his voice low and controlled. Could be drug-induced. Could be extreme psychological stress response. I've seen this in. He stopped talking. At the center of the chamber, in the space between the 4 workstations, was a column of air that was doing something air is not supposed to do. It was bending light. Not dramatically, not the way heat shimmer distorts a highway horizon on a summer afternoon. Subtly, precisely, the way a lens bends light purposefully, with what felt like intent. The beam of Yov's tactical flashlight entered that column and exited at an angle 3 degrees off from where physics said it should be. The electromagnetic pulses they'd been tracking from orbit. The rhythmic cycling of frequency spikes. The readings that Gal had said reminded her of nothing she'd ever analyzed. They were coming from this column of bent air. Dov stood at the edge of the workstation ring and did not move forward. Yov had never seen this man stop moving on an operation. Not in Gaza tunnel systems, not in Beirut, not in the mountain passes of Syria where the temperature dropped to -20, and the only option was to keep moving or freeze. But Dov Margalit stood at the edge of that ring and put one hand up, the flat palm signal that every operator knows means stop, do not proceed. Assess the situation from exactly where you are, and for 11 seconds, no one breathed. What is that? Ronnie said. It was the first genuinely naive question Yov had ever heard him ask. Before anyone could answer, the equipment changed. The oscilloscope waveforms that had been tracking the electromagnetic pulses flattened simultaneously to zero, and then, from the center of the chamber, from the column of bent light and impossible physics, a sound emerged. Not a mechanical sound, not anything the facility's equipment was producing, low, harmonic, layered in a way that suggested multiple sources occupying the same physical point in space. The kind of sound that doesn't travel through air so much as it travels through the bones of everyone standing in the room. Omar's radiation detector gave a single sharp chirp and went offline. Every piece of electronic equipment the team carried, watches, GPS units, encrypted radios, died within a span of 3 seconds. In the darkness and the silence that followed, with only the tactical flashlights still functioning, Yov Kellner stood 40 meters underground in the Iranian desert and understood, with a certainty that bypassed all training and all rational analysis, that the thing in the center of that chamber had just noticed them. And it was not surprised to see them. What happened in the 3 minutes after the equipment died? And what did the Iranian technicians do when consciousness suddenly flooded back into their eyes at the exact same moment? The lights came back on in the technicians' eyes all at once, not gradually, not the slow, blinking return of someone waking from deep sleep. All 4 men snapped to full consciousness simultaneously, like a switch had been thrown. And in the first instant of their awareness, before they registered the 5 armed figures standing in their chamber, each of them looked toward the center of the room. Not at the team, not at the breach point where Yov and his unit had entered, at the column, as though checking that it was still there, as though verifying, in the first microsecond of returning consciousness, that whatever relationship existed between them and that presence at the center of the room was still intact. Then the nearest technician saw Dov and screamed, not in fear, in warning. The Farsi was too fast for Yov's field level comprehension, but Gal caught it. They're here, it has them, don't let them. And then the man dropped to the floor, no physical cause, no visible impact. He simply folded in half and stopped moving, and the other 3 technicians did the same within 2 seconds of each other, hitting the stone floor with the loose, final weight of men who had stopped being conscious before they landed. Organic shutdown, Omar said, moving to the nearest man with practiced speed. He checked pulse, pupils, airway. Alive. Vital signs stable. This is not a seizure pattern. Whatever this is, it's deliberate. It put them down, Ronnie said. Nobody argued with the word choice. There was no better one. In the silence that followed, the column at the center of the chamber changed. The light, bending effect intensified. The visual distortion spreading outward from its core-like ring is expanding from a stone dropped in still water, rippling through 3-dimensional space in a way that made the walls of the chamber appear to breathe. Yov's tactical light hit the column and scattered in 4 different directions simultaneously. The harmonic sound that had knocked out their equipment resumed, but lower now, more structured, as though it were assembling itself into something purposeful. We need to leave, Dov said. He didn't say it loudly. He said it the way a man says something that is both obvious and, somehow, already too late. The entrance corridor behind them was gone, not blocked, not collapsed. Gone. The tunnel they had walked through, 60 meters of carved stone and fluorescent lit concrete, had been replaced by bare rock wall, seamless and unbroken, as though it had never existed. Ronnie was already at the wall with both hands flat against the surface, testing, feeling for seams. His demolitions training took over. He was calculating blast angles and load propagation through solid stone before anyone else had fully processed what they were looking at. I can get us through, he said. Give me 8 minutes. You'll bring the ceiling down on all of us, Gal said. I'll bring the ceiling down on all of us in a controlled manner, he replied, which was the most Ronnie Shashar response possible to that situation, and under any other circumstances might have been funny. The column pulsed. Every member of the team felt it, not through their ears, not through any sensory channel that had a name, but through the center of their chests, in the same anatomical neighborhood where fear lives, a single, deep compression of the air itself. And when it passed, the stone wall where the corridor had been was gone. The corridor was back, intact. unchanged, as though it had never disappeared at all. "It's showing us the door," Yov said. "Why?" Omar said. "It was not a question. Because it wants us to go through it," Gal answered. Nobody moved for 4 full seconds. In operational terms, 4 seconds is a long time. It's long enough to make a decision that determines everything that comes after it. Yov had trained for years to compress his decision, making into the space of a heartbeat, identify threat, assess options, commit to action. But standing in that chamber, with the column pulsing behind him, and an open corridor ahead of him, and 4 unconscious men on the floor, who had been reduced to instruments by something that didn't have a name in any language he spoke, he couldn't find the tactical framework that applied. Dov made the decision for them. Move. Single file. Weapons ready. Don't run. They moved. The corridor should have taken 40 minutes to traverse at operational pace. They covered it in 6. Yov could not account for the discrepancy and did not try to. The distance felt the same. Their pace felt the same. But the blast doors appeared ahead of them in a fraction of the time physics suggested was possible, and when Ronnie pushed them open and cold desert air hit Yov's face, the sky above was not the pre-dawn black they had left. It was deep orange. Sunrise. They had been inside for less than 40 minutes by everyone's watch. The sun's position suggested they had been gone for over 4 hours. "That's not possible," Ronnie said, staring at the horizon. "Adjust," Dov said. They adjusted. They moved to the extraction point. They maintained radio silence. They did what trained operators do when the mission produces data that doesn't compute. They compartmentalize. They execute. They process later, when there's somewhere that isn't a hostile insertion zone in Iranian territory. But 3 things happened during that extraction march that Yov could not compartmentalize. The first was Ronnie's arm. At some point during the movement to the LZ, he noticed Rana reaching for his water canteen with his left hand and grasping empty air, reaching through the canteen rather than for it, his fingers passing through solid matter, as though the matter were not entirely solid anymore. Ronnie stared at his own hand for 3 full seconds, then reached again with deliberate focus, and the second time his fingers closed around the canteen normally. He said nothing. He drank the water. He kept walking. The second was Gal. She hadn't spoken since they left the chamber. When Yov checked on her, she was walking with her eyes half, focused on some middle distance, her lips moving silently. When he touched her shoulder, she turned to him and spoke, but the sound that came out of her mouth was not her voice. It was 3 overlapping tones at different frequencies, producing syllables that formed words through destructive interference, like a radio signal assembling itself from multiple competing stations. The words were, "It already knows where we're going." Then she blinked, and her voice was normal, and she looked at him with the expression of someone who had no memory of what she'd just said. The third was the inscription on the rock face near the LZ. Yov had scanned that terrain during the approach. He had memorized it. There had been nothing on that rock face. No markings, no graffiti, no geological features that would hold the eye. Now, carved into the stone with what appeared to be centuries of weathering around the edges, as though they had always been there, were the same geometric symbols they had photographed inside the chamber. "Those weren't here before," Omar said. "No," Yov agreed. "So they're here now?" "Yes." The extraction helicopter arrived on schedule. They loaded without incident. The pilot asked no questions. Standard protocol. But as the aircraft gained altitude and the desert fell away beneath them, Yov looked out through the porthole at the coordinates of Lima 7, and in the pale orange light of an impossible sunrise, he saw a column of distorted air rising from the desert floor, bending light in a slow, unhurried spiral. Watching them leave, what happened when the team reached the debris facility, and why did the military psychologists who interviewed each operative separately report identical findings that were immediately classified at the highest level of Israeli intelligence? The debrief facility was a military installation outside Beersheba, and they reached it by the following evening. Standard post-operation protocol, separate rooms, individual assessments, medical screening before anything else. Yov had been through this process after every significant operation for 14 years. It was methodical, clinical, and designed to extract maximum intelligence from the team before the memory of stress began reshaping the details of what had actually happened. He sat across from a military psychologist he had never met before, a woman in her late 40s named Dr. Eiton, and he told her everything. The chamber, the column, the technician's simultaneous collapse, Gal's voice, Rana's hand passing through the canteen, the inscriptions on the rock face that had not existed during the approach. She listened without interrupting. She made notes in a small leather-bound journal rather than on a computer, a deliberate choice, Yov realized later, that prevented any digital record from being created in that room. When he finished, she asked him 3 questions, all of which were behavioral rather than factual, the kind of questions designed to assess psychological state rather than gather operational intelligence. Then she thanked him and left. She was gone for 2 hours. When she returned, she was accompanied by a man in civilian clothes, who did not introduce himself and did not sit down. He stood near the door with the practiced stillness of someone from the intelligence community, not security, not military, but the particular variety of government authority that doesn't require a uniform to make itself felt. The man said, "You encountered an abandoned facility with significant historical archaeological value. The electromagnetic anomalies were produced by natural geological activity consistent with the Dashti Kavir Salt Desert's documented geophysical properties. The technicians you encountered were contract archaeologists conducting a survey under Iranian Cultural Heritage Authority authorization. They suffered a mass psychogenic episode, likely triggered by environmental factors including low oxygen, low-frequency geological vibration, and psychological stress in an enclosed underground environment. You experienced a collective stress response consistent with the same environmental factors. Your team's mission was compromised by equipment failure and environmental disorientation. The operation is being categorized as a reconnaissance abort." Yov stared at him. 4 hours of time disappeared, he said. Elapsed mission time was consistent with briefing parameters. Every piece of electronic equipment we carried died simultaneously. Equipment failure cascade, likely triggered by high humidity underground environment combined with electromagnetic interference from geological activity. The corridor disappeared and reappeared. The man said nothing. The inscriptions on the rock face outside were not there during our approach. Geological surface features are frequently misidentified under stress and low light conditions. Yov looked at the man's face for a long moment, searching for the tell, the flicker of discomfort, the micro-expression of someone reciting a lie they don't entirely believe. He found nothing, which, he understood with a cold clarity that settled across his chest like weight, was itself a kind of answer. This man was not lying. He was not dismissing. He was executing a procedure he had executed before. This was not the first time someone had walked out of somewhere like Lima 7 and sat down in a room like this one. The medication was offered as a sleep aid. Yov accepted the pill without taking it, held it under his tongue and palmed it when the medical officer wasn't looking. Standard tradecraft. He had been given pills by people he didn't trust before. He had learned not to swallow them. The following morning, Dov Margalit gave the mission debrief to a full intelligence committee and described the operation as an abort, equipment failure, abandoned facility, 0 intelligence value gathered. He spoke with the calm authority of a 20-year veteran reporting a routine negative outcome. When Yov caught his eye across the briefing room, there was nothing there. Not suppression, not evasion, not the studied blankness of a man choosing not to speak about something he remembers. Genuine absence. Whatever had been in that chamber, whatever had pulsed through the air at the center of that room during those final seconds, had found the part of Dov Margalit's memory where Lima 7 lived and had quietly emptied it. Not erased, emptied. The way you can empty a hard drive without physically damaging the hardware. The operational data was gone. The man was intact. Gal, he found, was different. She remembered everything, but she experienced it differently. She described the column as a communication system, used the phrase signal architecture 4 times in a 15-minute conversation, and told him, with the focused precision of a former academic explaining a theorem, that whatever existed in that chamber had been using the Iranian technicians the way a human user interfaces with a computer terminal, not as prisoners, not as victims, but as access points. It was using their nervous systems as hardware, she said. The rhythmic pulses we tracked from orbit weren't electromagnetic output. They were processing cycles. That thing was computing. We just didn't recognize the medium it was using. Ronnie never mentioned the canteen. Not once in any conversation ever again. But 3 weeks after the operation, a photograph appeared in Unit 8200's internal surveillance archive, Ronnie at the shooting range. Left hand flat on the shooting bench while his right hand loaded a magazine. In the photograph, his left forearm passed through the solid surface of the bench by approximately 4 centimeters. The photograph had been flagged by an automated anomaly detection algorithm. It had been immediately reclassified. Yov saw it once, by accident, on a terminal he wasn't authorized to be using. He copied nothing. He said nothing. He deleted his access history and walked out of the building. Omar had begun keeping records. Not digital, handwritten notes in a medical journal, observations logged with clinical detachment about things that were not clinically detachable, changes in wound healing rates among the team, anomalous physiological readings during routine medical screenings. The fact that 3 separate military physicians had reviewed his post-operation blood work and each one had, within 48 hours, transferred to a different assignment without explanation. Something is managing the information, Omar told Yov during a brief private conversation 6 weeks after the operation. Not suppressing it, managing it, like a system performing maintenance. It doesn't want the data destroyed. It wants it controlled. Why? Yov asked. Omar considered the question for a long time. Because controlled information is useful. Destroyed information is just gone. That was the last private conversation they had before Yov's apartment in Tel Aviv began behaving in ways that Tel Aviv apartments are not supposed to behave. The lights flickered in patterns. Not random fluctuation, rhythmic, structured. The same geometric sequences he had photographed on the walls of the chamber. The television would activate without input, displaying static that occasionally organized itself into shapes that Yov needed 40 minutes of staring to realize were not random noise. His laptop produced audio through unpowered speakers. His phone showed call histories for conversations that had never taken place. But the timestamps were real, and the numbers were real. And when he dialed one of them, it rang twice and connected to dead silence that breathed. He stopped sleeping in his apartment after the 6th night. He filed nothing officially. He told no one in the command structure. He understood, with the clarity of a man who has spent 14 years reading threat environments for a living, that the official channel was the destination of information that needed to be managed. He began writing. Why did the intelligence community's response to Operation Rising Lion suggest this was not the first encounter? And what do declassified signals from 3 other nations reveal about events that mirror what Yov's team experienced beneath the Iranian desert? Yov spent 11 weeks researching, not in official databases, not in classified archives he could access through his Unit 8200 credentials. He had already understood that any search query he ran through official channels would be flagged, recorded, and used to accelerate the timeline of whatever was coming for him. He worked through open, source intelligence, academic journals, declassified military documents from the U.S. Freedom of Information Act archive, conversations with retired signals intelligence officers in 3 countries who were willing to talk off the record to someone who came recommended by people they trusted. What he found did not surprise him in the way new information is supposed to surprise you. It confirmed, layer by layer, with the cold weight of pattern recognition, something he had already understood in the chamber, but had not yet let himself fully articulate. This had happened before, not once, not twice, not in the way that one-off anomalies happen in a world large enough to produce statistical aberrations. Systematically, across decades, in multiple countries, at facilities where humanity had been splitting atoms or experimenting with high-energy physics in environments with specific geological characteristics, salt deserts, deep limestone formations, locations where natural piezoelectric properties in the rock created low-frequency electromagnetic resonance. The U.S. classified record contained a 1987 incident at a weapons research facility in Nevada, where a team of physicists reported a collective experience during a high-yield underground detonation test. The internal investigation files described sensory phenomena, equipment failures, and a 63-minute gap in recorded surveillance data. 3 members of the team were transferred to non-research assignments within 2 weeks. One filed a FOI request about the incident 17 years later and received a document containing 41 redacted pages and a single readable sentence. Environmental factors consistent with known geological phenomena. A Pakistani military intelligence report from 2003, partially leaked through a European journalist's archive, described an incident at the Chagai research complex during a calibration test. 4 engineers reported an awareness of external observation during the test and described visual anomalies in the chamber that matched, with a specificity that made Yov's neck tighten when he read it, what his team had encountered at Lima 7. The Pakistani report used a term drawn from Islamic scholarly tradition jinn, a category of non-material consciousness described in classical Arabic texts as existing in a dimension parallel to, but not identical with the physical world, capable of interaction with material reality under specific conditions. A French signals intelligence brief from 2011, accessed through a retired DGZ analyst, described rhythmic low-frequency electromagnetic pulses emanating from a former Soviet nuclear test site in Kazakhstan. The pulses were cycling. The French analysts had concluded, with visible discomfort in the language of the brief, that the signals showed signs of intentional structure inconsistent with residual geological activity. All 3 incidents had generated internal investigations. All 3 had been officially categorized as environmental anomalies. All 3 had resulted in personnel transfers, classification upgrades, and the systematic removal of primary witnesses from their original assignments. None of them had been connected to each other in any official record. Yov connected them. Methodically, carefully, with the analytical training of 14 years, reading intelligence across 4 theaters of active conflict. The pattern was undeniable once you stopped trying to explain each incident in isolation. These were not separate anomalies. They were contact events, encounters between human technological activity, specifically high-energy nuclear or particle physics operations conducted in geologically resonant environments, and a category of phenomenon that every major religious and philosophical tradition on Earth had described, in its own language, for thousands of years. The Islamic tradition called it jinn. The pre-Islamic Persian tradition called it deva, a consciousness of fire and air, neither fully material nor fully immaterial, capable of existing in both states simultaneously. The Jewish mystical tradition described entities associated with specific locations, with the capacity to affect physical reality through resonance rather than direct manipulation. The Zoroastrian texts spoke of Angra, not demons in the Christian theological sense, but forces of organizational complexity operating outside the causal framework humans inhabited. Different vocabularies, identical phenomenology, what nuclear technology appeared to be doing, what every high-yield test detonation, every active enrichment cascade, every particle accelerator operating above certain energy thresholds appeared to be doing, was generating vibrations in the physical substrate of reality that resonated across whatever dimensional boundary separated these entities from human perceptual space. Not doorways, exactly. More like the way a tuning fork held near a piano string causes the string to vibrate without physical contact. The nuclear activity was not summoning anything. It was making the local environment resonate at frequencies that entities already present, already occupying the adjacent space, already aware, could use as a medium for extended presence. They were not arriving, they were becoming audible, and some of them, based on what Yov had witnessed in that chamber, had been listening to human nuclear activity long enough to develop sophisticated models of human cognition, human nervous system architecture, and human technological infrastructure. The Iranian technicians had not been imprisoned. They had been operating in a state of cooperative interface. Their neurological architecture, used as a computing substrate by a consciousness that found biological neural networks a more flexible processing medium than the silicon arrays in the room around them. The Iranian government knew the technical infrastructure of the facility, the oscilloscope arrays, the particle detectors, the server banks, was not designed to contain or study the phenomenon. It was designed to manage the relationship, to provide the entity with the computing resources it requested, to keep the arrangement productive and stable. What had disturbed the arrangement was Yov's team, not the breach. The entity clearly had the capacity to detect the team before they reached the chamber and could have collapsed the corridor, disabled the team physically, or simply remained invisible. It had chosen to allow the encounter, chosen to reveal itself. It wanted us to see it, Gal had told him in one of their final conversations before he left Tel Aviv. The question isn't why it showed itself. The question is what showing itself to us was supposed to accomplish. Yov thought about that for a long time. He thought about it on the flight to Rome. He thought about it during the 3-day transit through Budapest. He was thinking about it, sitting in a hotel room in Prague with a laptop open and a document half written, when the lights in the room began cycling in geometric sequences. Not malfunctioning. Communicating. The same sequences. The same patterns from the chamber walls. From the rock face at the LZ. From his apartment in Tel Aviv. Wherever he went, whatever country, whatever power grid, the same message found him. He had stopped trying to decode the individual symbols. He had started thinking about the message holistically. What kind of consciousness sends the same signal across thousands of kilometers of independent electrical infrastructure to a single person who encountered it once in a desert? One that wants that person to understand something specific. One that has the patience and the reach to wait until the understanding arrives. He heard footsteps in the corridor outside his room. Heavy, measured, too evenly spaced. The door handle rotated slowly, stopped, rotated back. His phone showed full signal but could not place a call. The laptop's Wi-Fi icon showed a network. One network, not the hotel's, with a signal strength that should not have been physically possible at this distance from any router.
Enemy forces are here. We attack at dawn.
The network name was a string of the same geometric characters. He finished the document. He attached it to an email.
Got it.
He typed a subject line. He pressed send. What does the final testimony reveal about what the entity ultimately wanted? And why does the last paragraph Yov ever wrote suggest that the encounter at Lima 7 was not a warning, but an invitation?